Hi there, it's me, Finn, and tonight we're going back to the Middle Ages. Not to talk about battles or kings, but something softer, something slower, something, well, kind of romantic. You've heard of the knights, the castles, and the courtly dances, but have you ever wondered how people fell in love? Or what even counted as dating, when there were no phones, no texts, not even a cozy candlelit cafe? Tonight, let's drift into a world of soft glances, across muddy markets, secret notes, passed through chapel doors, songs whispered under windows, and long, long journeys, just to meet someone's gaze. It wasn't like today. Nope, it was slower, stranger, and sometimes, it wasn't even up to you. You won't believe how people made connections, and how love was more like a community arrangement. If you thought dating was hard now, well, oh, wait till you hear how they did it in the Middle Ages. Let's start by subscribing, pause, and now,
Let's begin.
it's quiet, just the soft chirping of birds above a wooden village. You're in a small medieval town, somewhere in England, or maybe France. It doesn't really matter. The roads are muddy, the roofs are straw, and the air smells a little smoky, mixed with warm bread and sweet herbs drying in windows. Now, imagine you're 15 years old, maybe 16. In medieval times, that's already, old enough to marry. Yep, back then, life was short, and so, people lived it quicker. Pause, but that didn't mean romance was missing. Ah, no, it just looked very different. In the early morning, girls might be helping their mothers grind flour, sweep the hearth, or milk goats. Boys were already out, carrying firewood or walking beside oxen in the fields. But even then, their eyes wandered, glances mattered, a look held longer than usual, a smile passed when passing by the well. These were early signs, soft little beginnings of what we might call love. But here's the first strange thing. Most people didn't pick their partners. Families did, especially in villages, where everyone knew everyone. Matches were made more for land, cows, or peace, than for butterflies. Still, humans will be humans. There were traditions, tiny rituals, ways to hint at feelings without words, like leaving a small token, a ribbon, or a piece of embroidery, near someone's door. Sometimes, a carved wooden spoon, a gift that meant, I made this for you, and I'm thinking of you. A boy might sing outside a girl's window, if he was brave, but in most cases, he'd just walk a little slower past her home, maybe look at the chickens, or ask her brother about the crops, just to be near. In richer families, things were more complicated. Let's take the manor house, up on the hill. The daughter there, oh, her dating life was like a chess game, polite, strategic, and almost always, arranged. She might receive a letter, written not by her suitor, but by his steward. It would be full of formalities, and sometimes, poetry copied from books. If she liked him, or rather if her father liked his land, and his family name, the next step would be a visit. Imagine this. She's standing in a hall, with a heavy wool dress, hands clasped, and in walks a boy, maybe 17, wearing a fur-lined tunic, and an awkward smile. There's no hugging, no laughter, just stiff words like, it honors me, to make your acquaintance. May the Lord bless this union. No sparks, no fireworks, just duty. But that doesn't mean feelings never grew. Over time, some of these arranged couples found warmth, respect, even tenderness. They learned to share firewood, to sit close when the wind howled through stone walls, to speak in hushed voices during evening prayers. Others, well, they drifted, quiet strangers under one roof, just existing. For the peasants though, the poor folk, love had a bit more freedom. Let's go back to that village path. There's a festival tonight, a feast day for Saint Valentine. Though in medieval times, that didn't mean chocolates and roses. No, it meant dancing on muddy fields, wearing flower crowns, and maybe, just maybe, getting to hold someone's hand. Imagine the moment. Two teens meet eyes across the bonfire. There's music, soft flutes, and the slow beat of hand drums. Someone's roasting onions and apples over the fire. The sky is inky black, but full of stars. They step forward, hands touch, They laugh nervously. Their parents watch from the side, pretending not to look. Those nights were rare and precious. But not all dating was innocent. There were customs, like bundling. You won't believe this. In parts of Northern Europe, a boy and girl might be allowed to lie in bed together, fully clothed, separated by a wooden board, or sewn into their blankets. Why? Because their parents wanted them to get to know each other, but not too well, if you know what I mean. Can you imagine? The cold room, the straw mattress, the sound of a sheep outside the window, two teenagers lying stiffly side by side, whispering into the night, under the watchful eyes of a grandmother dozing in the corner. It wasn't exactly romantic, but it was dating, medieval style. Another curious thing was courtly love. This is where nights come in. Courtly love wasn't about marriage. Nope, it was about longing. A knight would swear loyalty to a lady, usually one who was already married to a nobleman. He'd write poems, perform brave deeds in her name, wear her colors during a tournament. But the love was supposed to stay pure, distant, kind of like an emotional exercise. Some historians think it was a game, a way to flirt without crossing lines. But others say it was a way for people, especially women in strict marriages, to feel seen, to be admired, even if only from a distance. Imagine being that lady, sitting in your solar, the warm light from stained glass windows flickering on your book, when a servant brings you a letter, a poem, carefully folded, written with shaky ink and tender care. Your heart beats a little faster, not because you'll run away with him, but because someone, out there, sees you. Isn't that kind of beautiful? So, was there kissing? Yes. But only sometimes, and only in private. Kissing in public could be frowned upon, or seen as scandalous, unless it was a formal greeting between nobles. Instead, they might press foreheads, hold hands with fingers barely touching, or sit close while sharing a bowl of stew. That was intimacy, back then. No swiping, no late-night texting, just stolen glances, quiet moments, and hope. Now, here's something truly unexpected. Some girls propose to boys. Yup. Not often, but it happened, especially in the leap year tradition. In parts of Europe, on February 29th, women could propose to men, and if the man refused, he had to buy her gloves, or sometimes, a silk dress. How's that for a twist? It was one day every 4 years, where the rules flipped, and for many, that was the only chance to speak up. Imagine the courage it took, standing in the village square, hands trembling, eyes wide, saying the words, "Would you marry me?" We'll never know how many love stories bloomed, quietly, in the shadows of castles and cottages, but they were there, in every whisper through chapel halls, in every flower tucked behind an ear, in every tune hummed by a lonely shepherd on a misty hillside. They were there. Love, soft, awkward, patient, and hopeful, is always part of history, even when no one writes it down. And now, as the fire burns low in the hearth, as the medieval sky darkens to velvet, and the stars shimmer above wooden roofs, you drift. You wander through that village again, past cobbled roads, warm lights in windows, a soft voice singing near the church, and somewhere, in the corner of your mind, someone's waiting for you, at the edge of a dance, or behind a curtain, smiling. You pass by the edge of that same village, still wrapped in quiet. Still alive with little stories. But now, the moon is higher, and the soft light spills like silver over rooftops, down the thatched angles of cottages, and across the sleeping paths. In one of those cottages, a candle still flickers. Inside, a girl is sitting near the fire, combing her hair slowly with wooden fingers. She's not thinking about farming, or prayers, or the next feast day. Not tonight. No, her mind is somewhere else, far away. Where a boy might be carving a small gift, or writing her name in the dirt outside his hut, again and again, just to see it. Even in the simplest corners of the world, hearts were making quiet choices. But dating, dating in the Middle Ages, was never just two people. It was always, everyone else too. You see, there were customs, Rules. Things passed down not in books, but in looks from older women, or stern words from fathers. A girl might like a boy, but she'd also need her cousin's approval, her grandmother's nod, her father's patience, and sometimes even the village priest's silence. Courtship wasn't private. Not really. There were always eyes, watching, judging, sometimes helping. In some towns there were even matchmakers. Not with a list or a website, but with gossip in memory. "Oh yes," she'd say, "his uncle owned 3 goats, and once stitched fine saddles for the Lord's stables. And her aunt, she has strong hips and good hands for baking." These were compliments. Love was not about sparks. It was about potential. A home, a partnership, and maybe, if they were lucky, a warm moment at the end of a hard day. Still, there were games, little ones, meant to soften the process. In parts of Germany and France, a boy might give a girl a May branch, decorated with ribbons and flowers. This wasn't just pretty, it meant something. If the branch stayed up at her door, it meant she returned the feeling. But if it disappeared the next morning, ouch, the answer was no. No shouting, no heartbreak songs, just a missing branch, quiet rejection. And in villages where everyone knew each other, dances were the closest thing to a date. They weren't like modern dances though. No jumping or flashing lights. No yelling. No grinding. These were careful, circular, and choreographed. You danced with someone, then stepped away, then met eyes again on the next turn. It was a rhythm, a hint, a little code, and afterward, if both hearts fluttered just a little bit, they might walk home together. But not alone, never alone. Often, with a younger sibling tagging behind, or a grandmother peering from the window, just close enough. Even letters, weren't private. If a boy sent a girl a message, he often had to hand it to her father, or to a friend, or to a servant, and if the girl replied, she might not use words at all. Just a token, a woven thread, a dried flower, or a painted stone. Each one meant something. 1 knot, "With thinking of you." 2 knots, "I hope you'll wait." 3 knots, "I can't." It was a kind of language, built out of everyday objects. But if you understood it, if your heart was tuned to it, you'd hear it loud and clear. Now, let's visit a monastery town. Peaceful, clean, chants drifting through cold corridors. And nearby, a small girl helps her mother dye fabric, while a young man watches from the doorway. His father wants him to join the monks. Her family hopes she'll marry a carpenter. Neither one wants either fate. So, what happens? They pass each other, every morning, near the market, near the fountain. He leaves apples on the stone wall. She returns them polished. Days turn into weeks. Their hands never touch, but their eyes hold whole conversations. One day, he leaves a ring. It's simple, made from braided horsehair and copper. She picks it up, closes her hand around it, and never says a word. That Finn was dating. Quiet, dangerous, and kind of delicate. But not every story was sweet. Some were heavy, especially for girls. You see, power mattered, and for noble girls, especially in castles, dating wasn't just emotional, it was political. Let's step into one of those grand cold halls. Stone floors, long banners, a roaring fire that barely warms the air. A 13-year-old girl is sitting at a table, practicing embroidery. Across from her, sits a man in his 20s. His armor shines. His beard is thick. His voice is low. He's not here to make her laugh. He's here to seal an alliance. His family needs more land. Hers needs protection. By tomorrow they'll be engaged. By next year, she might have her first child. No kisses, no songs, just an agreement between fathers. It's hard to think of love in this room, but that was life for many. And still, some found warmth, even in arranged paths. They grew into love, like vines twisting toward each other slowly, over years, over seasons. That's something most people forget. Not all marriages started with feelings, but many feelings came later. And maybe, that's its own kind of love. Elsewhere, in Italy, in the countryside near Florence, dating had flair. Italians loved poetry, music, drama. Even peasants found ways to express themselves. You might hear a boy singing under a window at dawn. Not loudly, just enough. If the girl liked him, she might drop a scarf. If not, she'd close the shutters. Simple, and sometimes entire poems were carved into tree trunks, or painted on walls. Anonymous, of course. But the whole village would whisper and wonder. Was that for Marie? No. No. It must be for Lucia. Did you see how Paolo looked at her last feast? Dating was public, but secret. Obvious, but hidden. Kind of like shadows dancing at the edge of candlelight. Let's not forget how long distances matter. If your love lived in the next village, that meant a journey, over hills, through rain, past wolves. Yep, some lovers walked half a day just to get a glimpse, to stand in the same church on a Sunday, to smell the same air for one brief hour. And sometimes, that was enough. You'd catch each other's eyes during the hymn, maybe trade a glance during the offering, and then quietly return home, hearts fuller than they were before. Because in the Middle Ages, the smallest connections were precious. They had to. Now, let's peek inside a barn. Yes, a barn. During some festivals, barns were used for games. Soft games, like hiding in the hay and waiting to be found, or tying ribbons around wrists and seeing if someone would come untie them. No stakes, no promises, just giggles and risk. It sounds silly now, but back then, those were huge moments. Touches were rare. Time together was rare. A stolen hour in a barn might be remembered for years. And weddings? Oh, they came fast, sometimes after only one proper meeting, sometimes after a matchmaker visit, or in some cases, because of a kiss. You see, in parts of England, if two people kissed in front of witnesses, they could be considered married, especially if they exchanged vows, even informally, which meant, that one sweet moment could change everything. So people were careful, so careful. Every glance, every touch, every word mattered. It wasn't just boys and girls either. Some records, quiet ones, suggest that same-gender love existed too. In songs, in poems, in hidden spaces. But it had to stay hidden. The church forbade it. Society punished it. Still, you can find traces. Two women buried together with shared jewelry. Letters between monks that sound a lot like love. And those glances, those moments, that no one dared write down. Love finds its way, doesn't it? Even through stone. Even through fear. As the night deepens, and the wind moves gently through that same village, you can almost feel the hearts beating behind shuttered windows. A boy sleeps with a smile, dreaming of a girl who touched his hand at the well. A girl lies awake, twisting a ribbon around her finger, remembering the way he said her name. And outside, the stars shimmer on. Silent witnesses to 1,000 tiny romances. Stories that were never written down, but still lived, still felt, still remembered in quiet corners of history. Now, Finn, if you're still with me, you might be wondering what comes next. More festivals, more dances, the odd courtship trials, letters written in Latin. Oh, and maybe, we'll walk together into a medieval wedding soon. Or a market day scandal, or a nobleman's heartbreak. Because dating in the Middle Ages wasn't always sweet. It was awkward, tender, strange, and somehow, exactly human. Just like now. The stars begin to dim now, just a little. A warm breeze moves gently through the early morning sky. Some roosters, they start to murmur in their sleep. Not quite crowing yet, not quite ready for the day. But someone in a little cottage at the edge of a village. A young man ties the same wool scarf around his neck for the third time. He frowns, unties it, and redoes the knot again. He's not used to meeting girls, especially not ones who smiled at him, like she did, at the festival last week. He's thinking about what to say, how to walk, how to hold his hands so they don't seem nervous. All this, for a morning visit, just to see her father about some extra grain. But he knows, and she knows, that this isn't really about the grain. This, the beginning of something. In medieval times, mornings like this were sacred, because even the simplest meeting could be full of meaning. And village folk, They were quiet observers of these little beginnings. They watched from windows, stirred bread dough with slow fingers, whispering to themselves, "Isn't that Osric's boy? Oh, he's come early, she must be happy." Inside the house, the girl's mother is braiding her hair gently. Nothing is said, just the hum of a song that doesn't need words. And the girl, she doesn't say much either, but her cheeks are warm, because in her mind, she's thinking about his hands, his voice, how he looked at the cows last week when he didn't know she was watching. There is no perfume, no makeup, just clean hands, a tidy dress, and a hopeful heart. That's how you prepared for romance. Now, step out with me just past the village gates. We're heading to a larger market town. It's Thursday. That's when traders arrive. They come with linen tools, and, most importantly, news. And you see, back then dating also meant listening. A lot of it. If a girl's cousin saw a boy smoking too near the pig pens, or heard him say something rude to his uncle, that story would travel. Reputations mattered deeply. You weren't just dating the person, you were dating their name. Now let's sit near the old well. Not too close, just near enough to hear the laughter. It's where girls often gathered in the morning, drawing water, chatting, comparing apples, sharing scraps of cloth and gossip. Sometimes boys would linger nearby, pretending to check wagon wheels, brushing dust off boots that weren't dirty. The well was the place where eyes met, where giggles started, where accidental touches might happen when two buckets bumped. No phones, no texting, just glances, sounds, little smiles that said everything without saying a word. There's a kind of beauty to that slowness. No rush, no swipe left or right, just the patience of nature, the gentle tug of time. Even asking someone if they were interested took planning. A boy might bring the girl's family a basket of herbs, not flowers, herbs, like rosemary, thyme or mint, because each one meant something. Rosemary, I remember you. Thyme, be brave with me. Mint, I see you. Yes, herbs spoke where words might fail, and if her mother used the herbs in cooking the next day, that was a quiet approval. Medieval mothers were clever that way. But let's walk farther now. Past the low hills, where sheep rest, and into the courtyard of a grand house. Here, dating looked, different. Among the nobility, everything was wrapped in poetry. A knight wouldn't just say he loved someone. No, he'd write a ballad, or offer her a token, a handkerchief, a carved emblem, or a silk ribbon, before riding into a tournament. Imagine that, a whole day of jousting, shouting, clashing lances, all for the chance to catch one girl's smile from the balcony. Romance was theater, but also real, because even under the heavy chainmail and dusty boots, hearts beat the same as they did in quiet villages. Everyone, whether noble or poor, wanted to be seen. And the rules? So many. A knight might fall in love with a lady far above his station, but that love could never be public. Unless she lowered herself in status, which was rare, or he performed some heroic deed that made him worthy. So, love had to remain secret. Whispers in the chapel hallway, secret letters passed through handmaids, soft glances during feasts, and the pain. Oh, it was real. Because sometimes, they couldn't marry. They couldn't even speak. Just feel from a distance. Love can be loud, but in the Middle Ages, it was often heartbreakingly quiet. Now, speaking of quiet, let's go into a small church in Wales. Yes, you can almost hear the cold stones creak beneath your feet. It's early spring, rain taps lightly on the roof, and inside, a boy kneels beside a girl during morning prayers. They don't touch. They don't look. But, he leaves his glove beside her pew, and when she picks it up, folds it, and places it in her basket. Well, that's a whole conversation. Gloves, in those days, meant promises. If a girl wore a boy's glove tied at her waist, it meant she trusted him. And in some towns, it even meant engagement, a gesture instead of a diamond, a token instead of a speech. Now let's go far to the north. Scotland, rugged land, mountains, and fire pits, wind that bites your nose, and people, strong and quiet. In the Highlands, dating wasn't as gentle. It was bold, straightforward. A boy might challenge another to win a girl's attention. Not with swords, but with skill. Hunting, storytelling, dance. Yes, in the dark halls of a chieftain's keep, firelight danced on stone walls, and young men spun stories, sang, and leapt into wild folk dances, to win favor. The girl, she just watched. Her smile, her clap, or even the way she sipped her drink, was the answer. So simple, so subtle, and completely clear. In many places, matchmaking festivals happened once or twice a year. People came from distant villages to find someone new. Imagine walking down a dusty road, meeting someone from miles away, and feeling something stir. No social networks, just instinct, just presence. They'd gather in a field. There'd be music, bread, cider, laughter, girls with flowers woven into their hair, boys with nervous fingers, and the most important part, the choosing. You might walk with someone through the apple trees, talk, laugh, sit in the grass. If you both returned at sunset, still together, the village took notice. That meant, maybe, something had begun. Sometimes though, choices were made for you, especially if land status or trade were involved. A boy might love a miller's daughter, but be told to marry the blacksmith's niece. In the heartbreak, he'd bury it deep, write songs to himself, avoid the mill, try not to look back. But hearts, they remember. You can almost hear his sigh echoing off the stone walls when he walks alone past the place they used to meet. A part of him, always there, waiting. And not all stories ended sadly. Some lovers ran away, not in the dramatic movie way, but quietly, under moonlight, over fences, through quiet forests. They'd find a priest who'd bless the union in secret. Sometimes, they'd survive, build a life, return years later, children in tow, and old wounds forgiven. Other times, they'd fail, be caught, separated, sent back. But even then, they had their moment, their story, and for many, that was enough. As dawn finally touches the roofs of sleepy houses, once more, you begin to realize, dating in medieval times wasn't a single thing. It was 1,000 small things. A look, a loaf of bread left at someone's door, a ribbon tied to a gatepost, a note tucked into the seam of a tunic, a prayer whispered beside someone, and never spoken aloud again. It was slow, painful, tender, magical, and sometimes even funny, because love always finds its way, doesn't it? Even through stone walls, village rules, or rainy mornings. Somewhere, a girl wakes up, she stretches her arms, looks outside, and sees a tiny pile of pebbles on her window ledge. She knows exactly what they mean, and she smiles. You know, there's something about the way silence sits in the air after a love story ends. Not the end of the love, just the telling of it. Like the coals of a fire still glowing softly, even when the flame's gone quiet. Let's stay close to that fire a little longer tonight, because there's still more to know about how people in the medieval world courted, connected, and hoped. So many things, so many small moments that made up the way hearts met in the past. Let me tell you something. In a quiet town by the coast, not too large, but not tiny either, a girl named Ellen used to sell dried lavender, just little bundles, tied with rough twine. Her stand was right near the tanner's shop, so most people walked by quickly, covering their noses from the stink. But one day, a boy stopped anyway. Didn't even flinch. He just leaned in slowly, picked up a bundle, and asked, "Does this smell like midsummer where you're from?" And that was all it took, because medieval romance often began with a question. Not a bold one, not grand or clever, but something thoughtful, something ordinary, dipped gently in wonder. Ellen didn't answer right away. She just smiled. Not the kind of smile you wear, the kind that happens behind your eyes. Then she said, "Only on Thursdays, and only when it's dry." He laughed. and came back the next day, and the day after that, until the lavender ran out, and something else took its place. In so many villages, love began like that. Over bread, over sheep shearing, over apples dropped on purpose, and picked up slowly, with flushed cheeks. Even during chores, some of the deepest connections began with silence, shared labor, just two people pulling water from the same well, sweeping the same floor, or watching oxen plow through stubborn soil. That quiet companionship, it had a name in some towns. They called it soul mending, because that's what it did, it mended. But not all stories were so soft. There were rules. And they were sharp sometimes. A girl couldn't be alone with a boy after dusk. No candles between them. No closed doors. In some towns, if a man was found sneaking through a courtyard toward a girl's window, he'd be caught and punished. One village even made such men sweep the streets with a goose feather broom, wearing nothing but flour and shame. Medieval love was brave, because it had to be. You had to risk things. Family opinions, village whispers, church warnings, sometimes even your livelihood. But still, people risked it. They carved names into trees, left tiny wool hearts under doorsteps, shared the same mug during ale season, and that's how it went. You know, there was something called a courtship bench. It was wide, big enough for two, but with a tall, solid divider right in the middle, so you could sit together, but not touch, just talk, just listen. The bench was often set in churchyards, near the herb gardens or cloisters. Couples would sit there for hours, sometimes in silence, sometimes smiling without even needing words. Love was like that then, full of patience, slow courage. In the colder months, when evenings came earlier and snow began to fall, there was a tradition called hearth-sitting. Young people would gather at the home of a widow or elder, someone trusted, and simply sit by the fire. They'd roast chestnuts, mend old gloves, and sometimes sing. A boy might bring his flute, a girl her spindle, and they'd spend hours together. Never alone. Never too close. Just near, close enough for thoughts to bloom. And the stories, oh, Finn, they were full of longing. Tales of knights who rode into forests for 3 winters, just to find a ribbon, or bakers who saved their best loaf every market day, hoping the right girl would choose it. Stories where love didn't win with kisses, it won with waiting, with showing up, again and again, until waiting itself became the language of love. But not every courtship went well. Sometimes feelings didn't match. A boy might bring 7 gifts, carve a name in stone, write 3 poems, and still the girl wouldn't smile. Or worse, she'd smile and then turn away forever. Heartbreak was real, and people wore it. Some grew quiet, others started drinking. Some men even joined the monastery. Not for faith, but for forgetting. They'd shave their heads, take a vow of silence, and walk through the gardens trying to forget a girl who never looked back. And sometimes it worked, but often, not completely. Now let's peek into a different kind of story. Let's visit a miller's son, named Jaron. Jaron had never spoken to a girl. He wasn't handsome. His teeth were a little crooked, his tunic always too tight, but he had something else. He made things, tiny carvings, from bits of driftwood, birds, horses, even tiny faces. And one winter, he left one carving every Sunday outside the baker's door. The baker's daughter, Willa, thought it was a child's prank, until one day, she found a tiny carving of herself, with her hair, her eyes, her scarf. Willa didn't say anything, but the next Sunday, she left a crust of warm rye in return, and when Jaron found it, he sat down, on the road, right where he stood, and wept. Because even the smallest kindness can be everything to a lonely soul. That's what made medieval dating so fragile, Finn. There was no backup plan, no fallback option. You had one person, one hope, and you either cherished it, or lost it forever. Let's travel again, to the warmer edges of Spain, where olive groves ripple in the sun. There, courtship included something special, serenades. Yes, real ones. Boys would stand beneath the balconies of girls they adored, and sing. Not loudly, not boastfully, softly, hoping the breeze would carry the tune just far enough. And if the girl placed a candle in the window, it meant she'd heard. Sometimes she'd lean out, just for a second, and drop a handkerchief. Not a fancy one. Just enough to say, "I felt that too." The boy would catch it, press it to his chest, and walk home under moonlight, heart pounding. Even if nothing more ever came of it, the moment was enough. Because sometimes, you don't need a future to feel a love. Just a single perfect night. There were mistakes too. Not everyone was kind. There were flirts, who led people on, and cruel jokes, like pretending to court someone for a dare, that hurt deeply, especially for girls. Because if her reputation was tarnished, even unfairly, it could follow her forever. People judged, churches whispered, neighbors turned away. A girl's worth was tied to her name, and her name was delicate, like parchment in the rain. Still, love survived, through all of it, because the heart once, and always finds ways, through cracks in walls, through gaps in fences, through the sound of someone's voice humming, while they worked. And those who married, their courtship never really ended. They'd walk side by side to church, never holding hands, but always close. They'd share bread, laugh at the same jokes each spring. Some even kept the first ribbon, first poem, first glove, wrapped in cloth, tucked in a drawer, because that beginning, that first tiny spark, it mattered. Now, let's close the shutters for tonight. The wind's grown quiet, the sheep are curled together. Even the geese, have stopped their waddling fuss. And somewhere, in a little stone house, with ivy creeping over the windows, a woman reaches under her bed. She pulls out a box. Inside it, a folded piece of cloth, a silver thimble, and a tiny crooked carving. A gift from long ago. Her eyes close slowly, because even now, years later, that love still lives inside her. Sometimes when the rain falls gently on cobblestone roofs, and the fire burns low inside the hearth, people begin to remember. Not loudly, but like whispers in the grain of an old wooden door. And tonight, that door is open just a crack more. Ah, good, because now we can step into something deeper. Marriage. Yes, when love turned serious, and promises began to shape lives. In medieval times, marriage wasn't always romantic, but it was always important. More than a ceremony, more than a kiss. It was survival. It was strategy, but also, sometimes it was the purest kind of hope. Let's go back to a small village near the edge of a forest, where the soil was rough, and winter always arrived early. There, a girl named Tyla once fell in love with a boy named Oren. He had nothing. No land, no goats, not even a proper coat, but when he smiled at her, her heart melted like snow on the first warm day of spring. Tyla's father, didn't approve. He wanted her to marry Randall, the baker's son, who owned 3 carts, a roof of slate, and more flour than sense. But Tyla, she wanted Oren, and so, they ran, together, not far, just to the edge of the forest, where they met a friar named Benrick, who didn't mind bending the rules a little when love felt true. The ceremony, it was small, just 4 witnesses, a crow, and a wild dog that sat and watched the whole thing quietly. They exchanged vows with strings around their wrists, a tradition in some villages, called hand fasting. The cords weren't fancy, just bits of dyed wool, but the meaning, oh, it ran deep. It meant I tie myself to you, not just in joy, but in harvest, in hunger, in storms and in years when the hens won't lay. Some say that's when love is most real, when the harvest fails, and the hands still stay tied. But not every marriage came from love. Not by far. Many were arranged, sealed with contracts and goats, and names written on lambskin parchment. A father would shake hands with another father, and a girl, barely 13, would be told who her husband would be. She might cry, she might smile, she might feel nothing at all, because in truth, many girls had never spoken to the boy they'd soon be tied to. They'd seen him across a courtyard, maybe at a feast, but love was something to grow into, not something to choose. And yet, many of those marriages, they worked. They grew steady, like ivy up stone walls. Slowly, quietly, until one day there was no wall left without green. They learned each other's breath, each other's silences. Some even found comfort, deep companionship. They'd know the other's footstep on the floor, the sound of their yawn in the morning, the shape of their shadow against a lantern. And that was something. Now let me tell you something that might surprise you. Weddings. Not always white dresses and flowers. In medieval towns, a bride often wore her best dress, whatever it was. Could be green, could be brown with patches. It didn't matter, because what made her a bride wasn't the color, it was the garland she wore on her head, usually made of herbs, sometimes rosemary for remembrance, sometimes thyme, and if she was truly lucky, a few sprigs of lavender. The groom, well, he didn't wear a suit, he wore what he had, and he smiled a little too big, and his hands shook when he held hers. That was enough. The wedding feast, usually simple, a loaf, some stew, and if someone had good fortune that season, a bit of roasted chicken. There'd be dancing, a fiddle, maybe a drum, laughter in the cold air, and children chasing chickens through the legs of elders. No cake, but always a toast. Some guests would cry, not loudly, but the kind of cry that comes when you know life is hard. But tonight at least, love had won, even if only for a moment. In wealthier towns, weddings were much bigger, dozens of guests, carriages lined with silk, musicians playing lutes and shawms and flutes, until the sun came up. But even then, even with the gold and sugar and honeyed almonds, the heart of it was still the same. Two people, hoping for health, for peace, for something to hold on to when the fields froze, or the cows grew sick. After marriage, that's when things changed. The girl would move in with the boy's family, often under the same roof as his parents. She'd learn how his mother cooked stew, how his father sharpened blades. She'd sleep beside a fire with her new husband, their breath clouding the air in winter, their toes touching under rough wool. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and sometimes real is all you need. Children would follow soon, often within a year, and that love, the one that started with a shy smile or a stolen glance, would grow bigger, because holding a child that looked like both of you, that was powerful, even if the child cried too much, or never quite slept. Still, love deepened, like the grooves in a wooden spoon, subtle, but strong. Not all marriages were kind. Sometimes the man was cruel, or the woman resentful, and since divorce was almost unheard of, they stayed bitter and quiet. But some women, some found strength anyway. They made their own gardens, raised their children with softness, found joy in things outside their husbands. In song, in storytelling, in weaving pictures into fabric that only they understood. And that too was love, the love you give to yourself, when no one else will. Now let me tell you a strange thing. There was something called a bed blessing. When a couple married, their new bed, often stuffed with straw or hay, would be sprinkled with dried flowers, sometimes even holy water. The priest might say a short prayer outside the door, and then, the door would shut, and the marriage would begin. No candles, just moonlight through a crack in the shutters, and two people trembling, breathing, learning each other's shapes. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they cried, but always, they held on. Because medieval marriage was like that. You held on, even when it was hard, even when your hands were tired, from threshing grain or your back ached, from hauling buckets. And love was not always fire. Sometimes it was a candle that never went out. There were widows too, women who had loved once, and lost. Some remarried, others didn't. They lived alone, tended herb gardens, told stories to children about what it was like to be truly seen, once, by someone who remembered the shape of their smile. They kept their wedding garlands tucked into books, even when they dried to dust, because love, even lost, still lived. And men grieved too. Some carved their wife's name into oak, some stopped singing, some whispered to the wind on certain nights, as if she might still hear. It's easy to forget that medieval people felt love as deeply as we do now. But they did, they just didn't have the words. So they showed it in gestures, fixing a broken walking the long way home just to carry someone's basket, letting the last bit of bread go untouched, because she looked hungrier. Ah, and there was something called the silent vow. It wasn't spoken aloud, but shared between glances. It meant, I'll stay, I'll try, I'll walk beside you until the last frost. And most did, not perfectly, but with effort, even when their shoes wore through, even when their hearts got tired, because love, in medieval times, wasn't about fireworks. It was about staying. Staying through plague, through rain, through the endless sound of geese honking at dawn. Staying, because when the world is uncertain, love is the only certainty worth holding. Now, let the fire burn down just a bit more. Let the shadows stretch across the floor, and close your eyes to the sound of wool brushing against stone, because somewhere in a village long gone, beneath a sky full of stars that still shine, two people are still holding hands in the dark, and neither of them is letting go. You're still here. Good, because tonight, the wind is quiet again, the fire's just warm enough, and there's a little more to share. You remember Tyla and Oren, of course you do, their hands tied in wool, their love, young, gentle, patient. Well, tonight, we'll walk a little deeper into their world, and into the world of lovers, long past the wedding day. You see, in medieval times, love didn't stop at I do. No, no, that's just where it started. After the feast, and the dancing, and the rosemary garlands, came something much harder. Life, together, under one roof, with one bed, one set of tools, and often one goal: survive. Now, when a couple married, they didn't get a honeymoon like people do today. There was no trip to the sea, no quiet cottage, no flower-strewn bath. Instead, the very next morning, they went to work, literally, together. If he was a blacksmith, she might help with bellows, or sweep if she was a baker's daughter, he might help knead dough before the sun came up, because marriage was a partnership, more practical than poetic. And yet, that's where love deepened. In the quiet, in the shared silence over porridge in the early morning, in the way he fixed the bucket before she even asked, in the way she left him the last spoon of honey on cold winter days. No one wrote sonnets about that kind of love, but it was the strongest kind. Like the beams holding up the roof unseen, but absolutely everything. Tyla and Oren, they didn't have much. Their cottage was just one room, a hearth, a straw-stuffed bed, a clay jug they used for everything. But they had rhythm. She would hang the laundry in the late sun, and he would sit nearby, carving something useless but sweet, like a bird out of bark. They spoke softly, because there was no need to speak loudly. When you know someone's soul, whispering is enough. But not all couples were so lucky. Let's talk about hardship, because marriage in medieval times wasn't always soft. Some marriages were hard, cold, arranged without kindness or care. And yet, within even the toughest pairings, strange things could bloom. There was once a woman in Norwich. Her name was Breda. She married a man named Ethan, who was twice her age, and didn't believe in smiling. At first, she hated the quiet. He never said good morning. He never asked how her day was. He only chopped wood. But one night, when she burned the stew by accident, and cried quietly into her sleeve, he reached out, picked up a spoon, ate every charred bit, and said only, "Still warm." That's something. That's when she knew. He cared. He just didn't know how to say it. And so, she began noticing how he sharpened her needles when she wasn't looking, how he tucked an extra log by the hearth when the snow came, how he'd mend her shoes before mending his own. Some love doesn't come with roses or songs. It comes with stitched socks. Let's step now into another village. Let's say northern France. Picture a market town, the kind with apple carts, and noisy geese, and boys playing with sticks. Now here's where love got a bit more, mysterious. Because in towns, sometimes, not always, but sometimes people had a chance to choose. Yes, to fall in love on their own terms. There were dances, not fancy ones. not like kings and queens had, but harvest dances, feast day revels, midsummer gatherings, where boys tried to impress girls by leaping fires, or climbing poles or singing terribly off-key. It was at one of these dances that Elric met Mela. She laughed like a river, light and full and impossible to ignore, and he had a limp, a crooked nose, and eyes that always looked downward. But she saw something in him. Maybe it was the way he moved his fingers when he carved wood into toy animals. Maybe it was how he helped a chicken cross the road, gently shooing it with his hat. Whatever it was, it made her smile, and that was enough. Their courtship was slow, no touching hands, no kisses in the moonlight, just talking, exchanging baked things. Mela gave him a crust of bread shaped like a flower. Elric gave her a wooden brooch, with her initials carved on the back. Little things that said much more than words ever could. Eventually, their families agreed. A small ceremony, bells in the distance, and a cow mooing right in the middle of the vows. No moment is ever perfect, but love doesn't need perfection. It just needs presence. Now, sometimes when couples had been together many years, a strange thing would happen. Their faces would start to look similar. Not exactly the same, but softened the same way. Their eyes would wrinkle in the same corners. Their laugh would come in the same pattern, like the rhythm of two songs slowly syncing together over time. And the longer they were together, the fewer words they needed. One glance meant a full sentence. A sigh meant everything and nothing all at once. That was the final stage of medieval love. Quiet understanding. Of course, not all love stayed warm. There were fights, loud ones, silent ones, disagreements over bread, over goats, over children, and who forgot to latch the chicken coop again. But many couples made it through, because, there was a saying back then: marriage is not a song, it's a plow. It only works when both hands pull. Even nobility had their love stories. Strange, complicated, but still full of longing. Lady Isabel of Devonshire once wrote in her journal about her arranged husband: "He is cold in speech, but warm in silence. I think I have learned to love his quiet." Even kings and queens, surrounded by gold and velvet and grand tapestries, longed for closeness. Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine, once locked in a tower, wrote poems to her distant love, and those poems still survive, still speak of hands never held, of glances remembered like dreams. So, whether it was a poor farmer sharing stew by candlelight, or a noblewoman writing rhymes behind castle walls, love in all its forms whispered through medieval hearts, quietly, constantly. Now, picture this: a man with weathered hands, sitting beside his wife after a long day. He doesn't say much, just passes her a warm cloth to soak her feet. She doesn't thank him, she doesn't need to. Instead, she lays her head on his shoulder. They sit like that, until the moon climbs high, and the fire dies low. That's love. Not the start of it, but the middle. And sometimes the middle is where all the beauty lives. Did you feel that? The silence settling in. That means the night is deep, and you've wandered far through the folds of time. Rest now. The story isn't over. Not yet, but we'll leave this chapter here, by the fire's glow beside two people who found their rhythm. No titles, no poems, just breathing together in the dark. The candle's still lit, barely. The wax is a quiet puddle now, but there's a little more to say, more about what it meant to love, after marriage, in the hidden corners of medieval life. You see, in the villages of old, love and labor, they were braided together. You couldn't have one without the other. Even in the smallest cottages, affection had to survive the seasons, and oh, the seasons could be cruel. Winter was the hardest. When wind clawed at the windows and firewood ran low, that's when a marriage was tested. Not in words, not in grand confessions, but in who woke up first to start the fire, who gave up their half of the blanket, who took the cold side of the bed. Oren did, quietly, without asking, without ever letting Tyla know he hadn't slept. And when she found the frost on his shoulders one morning, she didn't say anything, just made an extra pot of thick broth, and sat beside him while he drank, not touching, just being near. It was a language without letters. That's how most medieval love looked. Now let's wander a bit, far from the village, into the monasteries. Yes, even monks and nuns once had love, though not always the kind you're thinking of. But still, there were deep bonds, quiet attachments, even longings. You see, many entered the convents not out of piety, but out of pressure. Not every sister of the cloth came willingly. Some left behind sweethearts, a boy with eyes like soft rainwater, a girl who once sang to geese in the orchard. They didn't forget them. No, they kept their memories in poems, woven into embroidery, hidden in the margins of prayer books. One nun in the Abbey of Sainte Marie once stitched her lover's initials beneath her hem, so it touched her skin when she knelt to pray. Ah, the quiet rebellion of love, even in sacred halls. Now, back to our world of husbands and wives. Let's talk about letters. Rare, yes, but not impossible. Among those who could write, lovers would sometimes leave each other notes. Short ones. A piece of slate on the table, bread in the oven. I saved you the crust. A scrap of parchment tied to the door. Don't forget your scarf. It's cold near the fields. Little things, soft like whispers. That's what love became over time. Less spark, more ember. But embers can warm you through the darkest nights. Sometimes, couples had children, and that changed everything. Not worse, not better, just different. Love became a team effort, holding crying babies at midnight, chopping twice the wood, saving the nicer piece of cheese for the child's supper. And when the baby finally slept, a silence would fall between them. Not empty, but full. A silence that said, "Look what we've made. Look how far we've come." Some nights they didn't speak at all. Just held hands, worn and rough, across the wooden table. It was enough. Now, not all love stories stayed close. Sometimes one had to leave. War called, or famine, or worse, debt. And when that happened, a promise was made, to return, no matter what. Did they all return? No, but some did, and those who did, were never the same. Neither were the ones who waited, but still, they tried again. Love didn't need to be perfect, just possible. Let's drift into another room. A merchant's house, larger, wooden beams, a little glass in the window, and in that house, a man and woman who married for trade, not love. But one day while sorting cloth, she laughs. He's never heard her laugh before, and it startles him, so much joy. From her, she looks up, catches him staring, says nothing, but the next day he brings home ribbon, blue, the color she once admired, and when she wears it in her hair, he smiles. Like we said before, love doesn't always come first. Sometimes it grows, like moss on stone, slow, soft, quiet. Now, there was another kind of love. The forbidden kind. Whispers behind church walls, stolen glances across markets, even nights. Oh, they fell hard, but not always for the ones they were promised to. And that brought risk, sometimes exile, sometimes silence forever. But even then, the memory lingered, in a carved token, a pressed flower hidden in a shoe, a song hummed long after the singer had gone. The ache of love left behind. Now come with me, to an old couple, very old, brittle as parchment, living near the sea. They don't talk much anymore, their bones ache, their steps are slow, but every evening he brushes her hair. Even though it's thin and white and doesn't need brushing, he does it anyway, because once, long ago he told her he would, and he still does. Promises are everything in love, even if no one remembers them but you. Tyla and Oren grew older too. Gray came in quietly, so did silence, but not a cold one, more like a blanket, warm, reliable. Every night she would place a little bowl of herbs on the fire, just because he liked the smell, and every morning he'd set her slippers near the hearth, even in summer, just because that's how love looks, years down the line. Not fire, not thunder, just gentle repetition. And sometimes that's all we need. One day, Oren fell ill, quietly, no drama, just slower mornings. He couldn't lift the pail anymore. Tyla noticed, but didn't say anything, just started lifting it herself, and he let her. That was love too, letting go of pride, so someone else could carry the weight. In those last weeks, they said very little. He just held her hand, and she hummed old songs. On the day he left the world, the sky was clear, and the fire was still warm, and her hand never left his. Not once. Later she would walk the same paths they once walked together, alone, but not lonely, because some love never really leaves. It just becomes part of the air. Do you hear that? The wind's turning outside. The candle flickers low again, but not out, never out, because the story continues. Not always loudly, sometimes just in the way we remember, and in the quiet, kind ways people once lived and loved. We'll pause here, not end, just pause, because somewhere a pair of hands is still brushing long gray hair, and someone is tucking slippers by the fire, and that, my friend, is love, still glowing. Let's breathe, softly now. The fire hasn't gone out yet. There's more to see, more quiet stories to unfold, and tonight, we walk towards something delicate. Love in the medieval world wasn't always just between two people. Sometimes, it was between many. Not in the way we think today, not wild or scandalous, just different. Because the idea of courtly love was a story all its own. And it didn't always mean marriage, or even being together. Let's go to a court in the south of France, where poetry was a language of longing, where noble women sat beneath carved wooden arches, and listened as young men sang verses to them, verses they'd written through sleepless nights, not for the body, but for the soul. Courtly love. It was dreamy, distant, delicate, almost like falling in love with a star. You could see it, want it, write sonnets to it, but you could never quite touch it. And that was the point. Desire was in the ache, in the not having, in the way your heart raced when she looked your way, for just a second longer than she should have. The troubadours knew that feeling well. Their lutes carried hundreds of whispered names, and none of them were ever meant to be answered. In the courts of Eleanor of Aquitaine, this strange dance of unrequited love was an art form. Men would pledge loyalty to ladies who were already married. They called them domna, the lady, not to possess, just to admire. And those ladies, well, they were often cleverer than the poets. They knew how to play the game, to look but not look, to answer with a smile that meant everything and nothing at once. In this world, love wasn't about living together. It was about feeling something deeply from afar, like a flame kept in glass, beautiful but untouchable. Not all love was this clean, of course. There were letters passed in secret, glances behind the church pillar, late-night confessions beneath castle stairs, but mostly, it was a dance of ideas, of gestures, like tying a lady's sleeve around your sword hilt before battle, so her presence would be with you, even if her body never could be. Now, let's drift from the noble courts back to the forests, to the edge of towns, where the hedgerows grow thick and the herbs have names older than Latin. Here, there were women, the wise ones, the herb wives, the midwives, the hedge healers, and sometimes, they had lovers too, not knights, not scribes, but woodsmen, hunters, travelers, men who came and went like the wind. These loves were different, earthy, real, born from shared tea, shared silence, a hand on the back when the sun went down, and sometimes, a baby came from it, sometimes not, and no one asked questions, because in these places, love didn't have to follow rules. One such woman was called Myra. She lived near the river, with fox pelts hanging on her wall, and jars full of dried roots. Her hair was long, always braided with rosemary. They said she knew every tree by name, and sometimes, when the moon was bright, a man would visit. He never stayed past dawn, but always left a piece of bread, or a fish, or a poem carved into bark. Myra never spoke of him, but when the wind blew a certain way, her eyes grew soft. That too was love. And then there were festivals. Festivals, where the rules bent like wheat in the wind. The most famous was Beltane, when fires were lit high on the hills, and young people ran beneath them, hand in hand. That night, you could kiss someone, anyone, and it didn't mean forever, just meant the stars were out, and your heart felt full. Many babies came 9 months later. People smiled, nodded, no shame. The earth had turned again, that was enough. But not everyone loved easily. There were many who didn't find what they were looking for. Women considered unmarriable, men with nothing to offer, or hearts too hurt to try again. They lived quietly, sometimes alone, but not always lonely. Some found love in animals, in tending gardens, in carving toys for children not their own. Love is strange like that. It finds little pockets to live in, even when the big doors are closed. And then, there were friendships. Friendships so deep, they looked like love. Two women sharing a bed, two men walking hand in hand, writing to each other like lovers. Were they? Maybe, maybe not. No one asked, and they didn't feel the need to answer. Because sometimes, love just was. No name needed, just a presence, a comfort, like warm bread, or a sunbeam through the window. Let's visit a different kind of heart now. The kind that broke, because yes, medieval people had heartbreak too. They just didn't call it that. When a lover left, when a marriage soured, when someone died, or worse, when someone stayed, but stopped seeing you, that hurt, quietly, deeply. You couldn't cry in the square, or shout from rooftops, but you could carve their name into a tree, or bury a ribbon, or whisper a song to the river. One boy, Elric, used to sit outside the tavern, just where the lamplight ended, waiting for someone who never came. He didn't speak of her, but he always wore the same scarf she'd made him, even in summer. Eventually the scarf wore out, but he didn't stop wearing it, just folded it in his pocket. A quiet kind of grief, but a tender one. In some cases, heartbreak made people leave, to walk the pilgrim's path, to serve in a monastery, to tend the sick, to find something bigger than themselves, because their heart no longer fit their own chest. Love, and its loss, shaped many lives. But, even so, most people tried again. Eventually, they opened their hearts to a baker's smile, or a widow's laugh, or the hand of someone who once sharpened their knife. And slowly, the pain faded, not gone, just softer, like the bell at vespers. And that's where we leave the lovers tonight. Not in castles, or poems, but in kitchens, by fields, on boats heading out at dawn, holding hands in ways no one sees, and giving little parts of themselves, without ever expecting return. That was the true shape of love in those days. Not perfect, not planned, just human, gentle, present. Are you still awake? No? Maybe just a little. That's okay. The story's still going. Even if your eyes are heavy, even if the candle is just a soft glow now, even if we drift a little slower, just know, love in medieval times, it wasn't always grand, or clear, but it was there, in 100 quiet ways, still burning, even now. Where were we? Yes, let's walk a little farther into the village now. The church bell just rang once, and the smell of bread is dancing from the stone ovens. The morning is pale, and behind half-closed shutters, mothers and fathers are already talking about marriage. You see, in many medieval towns, love wasn't always left to the heart alone. Sometimes, it was arranged, gently, softly, like sewing two pieces of cloth together, thread by thread. A girl might be no older than 15, a boy just a few winters more, and already, their futures were being whispered over cups of warm cider, or while chopping onions for supper. It didn't always feel unfair. To many it felt expected, safe, the way things had always been. And sometimes, those marriages became kind, even sweet, but not always. Let's visit a small town now. Maybe somewhere in northern England. Cobblestone streets, mossy roofs, and a little well in the center, where neighbors talk in low voices. Today, there's news. The cooper's daughter, May, she's been offered to the smith's apprentice. He's strong, quiet, and steady with his hands. May doesn't say much, but at supper that night, her fingers tremble when she picks up her spoon. She didn't choose him, but he isn't cruel, and that, in those days, was often enough. The next morning, she's brought to the church, not for the wedding, not yet, but to meet his mother. They sit by the fire together, knit, talk about bread, and measure each other's silences. This is the medieval version of a first date. No candles, no music, just wool and glances and hot broth. Sometimes, that was all you got. But sometimes, it worked, like old shoes fitting new feet. Now, not everyone wanted this. There were rebels, dreamers, girls who ran to the edge of the fields at dusk, hoping to catch sight of a shepherd, or boys who lingered in markets longer than they needed, just to hear a certain baker's laugh. Love still found ways to wiggle free, through cracks in the fence, underneath family dinners, in shared stories by candlelight. It wasn't always loud, but it was always looking, waiting. Let's not forget the matchmakers. Oh yes, they existed. Not like today's apps and swipes. These were old women, who knew everything. They knew who was kind, who drank too much, who had good teeth, and who snored like a thundercloud. They'd walk through villages with little notes tucked in their sleeves. Sometimes no words at all, just names. And when a mother saw her coming, she'd step outside, wipe her hands on her apron, and say, well then, who's she got in mind today? It wasn't romantic, but it was careful. People wanted their children to have warm homes, safe hands, steady futures, even if it meant a little less fire. Though sometimes, the fire came anyway, unexpectedly. One day, a boy named Tomas was set to marry the tanner's daughter. A deal was made, dowries exchanged. The wedding was just weeks away. But then came Eli. She was new in town. Brown eyes like wet bark, quiet voice. She made candles with her aunt. Thomas saw her only once, but that was enough. He didn't eat that night, didn't sleep well, and 2 days later, he called the wedding off. It caused quite the stir, but no one could stop it. Elia had said nothing. She didn't even know. But something inside Thomas wouldn't let go. They didn't marry until 3 years later. But they did marry. In the same little church with ivy on its walls. Not every love story followed the rules. Some were born of pure chance, like two people reaching for the same apple at the market. Their hands brushing, and both blushing. There were girls who fell for traveling singers, boys who fell for visiting nuns, farmers who never looked at anyone else, except the woman who sold eggs beside the gate. And yes, there were forbidden loves, rich with poor, Christian with pagan, even boy with boy, or girl with girl. These were quiet, hidden, but they happened, in letters burned after reading, in carved initials under pews, in long walks at twilight, where no one spoke a word, because everything they needed to say was already there. Parents didn't always approve. Some sent daughters to convents, others sent sons to war. But love, well, it has a way of surviving. Even when it has to hide. Let's talk now about dowries. The coins behind the kisses. You see, marriage wasn't just about hearts. It was also about cloth, land, goats, shoes, even spoons. Yes, spoons. Some girls brought only one. Others brought 5. That mattered. A large dowry meant better options, a bigger oven, a higher window, but even without much, some still found love. It just took more time, more kindness, more patience. And sometimes, nothing was offered but a smile, and still, someone said yes, because they liked how that smile felt in their chest. Love wasn't always fair. Sometimes, people settled, married out of fear, loneliness, or because winter was coming, and 2 fires were warmer than one. But even in those unions, small joys could bloom, like a shared laugh, or the way they each liked the same soup, or how they planted beans on the same day, each year, without ever agreeing to. The heart adjusts, softens, learns to lean. And now, let's not forget the priests. They had opinions too. Love should be sacred, pure, marriages had to be blessed. Otherwise, they were sinful. But still, some couples married in fields, under trees, by rivers, with no priest at all, just hands held together, and whispered vows. That counted too. They called it hand fasting. 1 year, 1 day. Then, if they still wanted each other, they'd stay. If not, they'd let go. simple, but powerful. Some say the church hated it, others say the priests turned a blind eye, because love has always made its own rules. So, in all of this, matchmaking, arrangement, hidden kisses, where does romance live? Right there, in the in-between, in the touch of a sleeve, in the look passed over stew, in the songs sung when no one is listening, in the hands that build homes, in the ones that comfort at night. Love wasn't always wild, or loud, or made for poems, but it was real, and human, and sometimes, exactly what they needed to get through one more winter. The sky outside is dark now. Can you hear the wind brushing against the wooden shutters? The fire's still glowing, just softly, like love itself. Are you still with me? Still awake? Maybe not. That's okay. The world was gentle once. If you knew where to look, and tonight, you've looked. So let yourself drift now, quietly, gently, just like them. That wind's still whispering outside, soft, almost like it's telling a story of its own. Let's go now, to the moment everything changes, the wedding day, not the ones with gold and trumpets. Let's begin with something quieter. A small wedding, just two families, one couple, one priest, and one loaf of bread to share after. It was enough, more than enough. Let's say, it's spring. The snow melted just last week. The grass is soft again. Birds are trying their first songs of the season. And young Elena is finally getting married. She's 17. Her dress isn't new. It's her mother's, faded blue. A little tighter in the sleeves, but still, beautiful. Her shoes, one has a patch near the heel, the other, a little stitching near the toe. You wouldn't notice, unless you really looked. But her father notices, and smiles. He remembers those shoes, from his wife's wedding day. The groom, Ralph, he waits at the little church door, holding a single flower. It's not even for Elena, it's for her grandmother. He's that kind of boy. That's why she said yes. Now, they walk slowly down the aisle. No crowds, no music, just footsteps and breathing. And the priest, he's old, but gentle. He ties their hands with a red ribbon. That's hand fasting, again, not just for field weddings anymore. It became tradition. Red meant life, blood, warmth. And this ribbon, her aunt, made it from an old tablecloth. But tonight, it's holy. The words spoken were simple, no grand speeches, just promises, softly said. I will share your fire. I will watch your sleep. I will mend your socks. I will not leave you in the rain. That was enough. Then, bread is broken. A little wine, a little laughter, and the whole village claps, not loudly, just enough to send warmth into the couple's cheeks. Now, let's walk a few valleys over, and peek into something grander. A noble wedding. Candles everywhere, strings of herbs and dried fruit, hanging from the rafters, meat roasting on spits, spiced wine in wooden cups, lords and ladies in their best, silks rustling like leaves. And the bride? Her dress is gold, not real gold, but close, embroidered with tiny lilies. Her sleeves reach her knees. Her hair is in long braids, laced with pearls. It took 4 women all morning to finish it. She hasn't eaten all day, but she's smiling. The groom arrives on horseback, cloaked in red velvet. He bows, low, before her father. Not because he wants to, because he must. This marriage, it's not love, it's land. But, they'll learn each other, over time. Maybe. They exchange rings, carved from bone and silver. They kiss quickly. Everyone cheers, too loudly. Not everyone's comfortable. Then the feast begins. Let's talk about that. Feasts were something else entirely. Roasted swans with flowers in their beaks. Pies shaped like castles. Nuts in bowls carved from antlers. Honey cakes. Turnip stews. Jugs of ale that never seemed to empty. And music, always music. Lutes and flutes. Soft drums. Maybe even a harp. Sometimes the bride would sing, just one verse, and it would echo through the whole hall like a blessing. Weddings in the medieval world, they weren't about perfection, they were about presence, families being together, people laughing, babies crying, old men toasting a little too hard. and somewhere, in the middle of it, two people, becoming one. Now, let's visit the little traditions, the hidden parts, like the shoes. The bride had to lose her shoes. Yes, it was believed that a barefoot bride would carry nothing but love into the marriage. In some villages, the groom would tap her heel with a stick to show he accepted her past. In others, she would carry a key, symbol of her new home, even if the home was just one room, with cold stones and a drafty roof. There was also the bedding ceremony. Not what you think. It was public. The couple would be escorted to their room, and guests would throw nuts. Why? Because nuts meant fertility, new life, strong roots. They'd close the door behind them, then open it again, just for a moment, to say, "We are not alone now." Some customs were sweet, others, less so, like testing the bed sheets the next morning, checking first signs, a cruel practice, but common, because honor mattered, and proof was demanded. But not in every place. Some families trusted the smile, the blush, the way the couple looked at each other, while cutting bread. That was all the proof they needed. Now, let's walk into a poorer village, where weddings were simpler still. No feasts, no music, just a man and a woman, holding hands at the edge of a well. They'd throw a coin in, watch it sink, then turn to each other and say, "You are mine." And that was marriage. They'd walk back to their cottage. No parade, no ribbons, just the sound of their footsteps on damp earth. And maybe, if they were lucky, a little dog would follow them home. Love didn't need trumpets. It just needed room. Room to grow, like ivy on old stone, slow, steady, and strong. Now, let's talk about wedding gifts. Sometimes, it was a sack of grain, or a comb made of bone, or a blanket stitched with initials. Sometimes, it was just a story. An elder would sit down and say, "Let me tell you what makes a marriage last." And then they'd talk and talk until the candles burned low. You might be wondering, what did they do the next day? After the dancing, after the food, they worked. Yes. Married or not, life didn't wait. Fields needed sowing, cows needed milking, wood needed chopping. But now they had each other. Two hands instead of one, two backs to carry the load, two smiles to share. Even on muddy mornings, marriage in medieval times wasn't always about love, but love found its way in, through chores, through shared soup, through holding each other when the roof leaked, or when winter came early, or when the baby wouldn't sleep. They built a life together, not from magic, but from mud and laughter, and doing the same things again and again, until they felt like music. That's what weddings were. Then, a beginning, not a climax, just the first footstep into a long winding path. Some stumbled, some danced, some walked side by side, until the very end. Now, can you still hear the music? That soft lute playing, from a village far away? Can you smell the bread, see the candles, feel the wool dress against your skin? That's the magic of slow stories, of quiet love, of old weddings, remembered in whispers. The bread's gone now, the guests have gone home. Only a few crumbs left on the table, and two cups near the fire, still half full. It's quiet, just the crackle of a small flame, and the sound of breathing. Two people, sitting side by side, not saying much, just being. This is the start of married life. Not the grand dances, not the silks and the stews. This is the part that most people didn't see. But maybe it was the most beautiful part of all. You see, after the wedding, things didn't change much. The cows still needed milking, the firewood still had to be chopped, and the chickens still clucked at sunrise, no matter who was in the bed. But now, there were two bowls at breakfast, two cloaks on the hook, two shadows moving across the cottage wall. Let's take one day, just one slow day, and follow it gently. It's morning. The window shutters are still closed. The hearth has gone cold, but someone stirs beneath the blanket. A hand reaches out, to find another hand already waiting there. The first morning of many. She gets up first. Her feet are cold on the stone floor. She tiptoes around the kettle, still learning which planks squeak. He pretends to sleep, but he's watching her. Just a little. That's how love begins to settle, like flour in a sack, quiet, but heavy with purpose. She pours water from the jug, puts it over the fire, waits. He sits up slowly, wraps the blanket around both their shoulders. No words yet, just warmth, and steam curling toward the ceiling. Breakfast, if they're lucky, some rye bread, maybe a spoonful of cheese, and if the hen has been kind, an egg. They eat in silence, but it's not empty, it's full of glances, of gratitude, of knowing that neither has to do this alone now. After that, they work, together, or apart. Sometimes he's in the field, digging, sewing, sweating. Sometimes she's spinning wool, fixing clothes, or walking to market. Sometimes it's the other way around. In truth, they didn't care who did what. They just did it, because survival was more important than roles. In wealthier homes, it was different. Servants did the chores, and marriage became a kind of quiet theater. He'd read by candlelight. She'd stitch embroidery for hours. They might take a walk in the garden, or sit through a sermon, or visit neighbors for cake and whispers. But, even then, there was longing, for realness, for softness. Some noble couples snuck away to the kitchens, to bake bread together, just to feel something honest in their hands. Isn't that lovely? But most couples lived in one room, one bed, one door, no secrets, no space. You learned everything quickly, how your partner snored, how they laughed at silly things, how they liked their stew, which songs they hummed while washing up. Arguments, of course, sometimes over missing spoons, sometimes over burnt soup, sometimes over nothing at all, because people are people, even in the 1300s. But they always found their way back, through touch, through apology, through sitting together while the fire died out. Sometimes she would make him a shirt, out of old linen, and he'd wear it even when it scratched his skin, because she made it, and that was enough. Sometimes he'd bring her flowers, wild ones, mostly dandelions, and she'd put them in the chipped cup by the window, because he picked them, and that was enough. Let's talk about winter. When the nights grew long, and the sun left too early, when their breath hung like mist indoors, and the only light came from a single candle, balanced on an old iron nail. They'd pull their bed as close to the fire as they could, pile furs and wool and cloaks on top, tuck their toes into each other's knees, and wait for warmth, wait for sleep, wait for spring. Sometimes they'd tell stories of childhood, of village ghosts, of saints and sinners. She'd lean on his shoulder, he'd stroke her hand, slowly, like counting blessings, one finger at a time, and when the wind howled, they'd just pull the blanket higher, and breathe, in rhythm. Together. Now, let's visit them in summer, fields green, the stream running fast. She's kneeling in the garden, he's up on the roof, fixing that same loose shingle again. They don't speak, but they smile, every few minutes, just to remind each other, I see you, I'm glad you're here. Do you know what joy looked like? It wasn't fireworks, or riches, it was small things, finding a hidden berry bush, hearing your name spoken softly, fixing something together, laughing over spilled milk. Joy was returning home with sore feet and smelling bread in the air, seeing a candle left burning just for you. Sometimes, it was waking up and remembering, yes, someone loves me. But life wasn't always gentle. There were famines, plagues, loss, miscarriages, sickness, long winters with no flower, nights without hope. And in those moments, marriage meant sitting beside each other and saying nothing, because words couldn't fix it, but presence could. One hand on another, one sigh answered by another, one breath reminding the other, I'm still here, I'm not going anywhere. Sometimes the roof would leak, and they'd have to move the bed, sleep under a table, and still, they would whisper, this is our home. And there were good years too, when crops grew tall, when children came, when there was enough soup for seconds, and the songs were a little louder that season. They'd teach each other new things. She taught him how to sew a button. He taught her how to sharpen a blade. They took turns holding the baby. And when they danced, because they did dance, it was slow, rocking side to side, bare feet on packed earth, humming songs older than their grandparents. At night, they would lie on their backs, look up at the rafters, and count the little knots in the wood, the same ones, every night, like stars they could reach. And in the morning, it all began again, but easier, because they were used to the rhythm now, the way you can become part of someone else's pattern, and they part of yours. This was marriage, not the kind you find in stories with dragons, but the kind you find when you look out the window and see two figures bent over a field, one handing the other a cup, one brushing the hair from the other's eyes. Time passed like that, softly. Some couples lived like this for 40 years, some for only 5, but either way, they built something that lasted longer than memory. They built warmth. Even in the coldest times, even when snow kissed the thatch, even when the world outside was falling apart, they held each other, and that made it bearable. Can you hear it now? That silence filled with comfort, that quiet breath beside your own. That's what love sounded like in medieval times. Not loud, not grand, but real. And real things never truly fade. The candle has almost melted now. The wax has dripped into a soft puddle near the base. And outside, the stars have turned just a little. Time passes, slowly, but it passes. In the small cottage, something stirs, a new sound, a soft cry, not from pain, but from life. The child is born. It wasn't like it is today, with hospitals and blinking lights, and soft blankets. No, it was quieter, darker, more uncertain. But it was also deeply human. When she went into labor, it was the midwife who came, a local woman, older, with steady hands and a voice like warm bread. She'd seen dozens of births, some smooth, some not. He waited outside, pacing, fingers curled tight. Every few moments he looked to the door, listened for sounds, wondered what was happening. Hours passed like syrup, thick, slow, heavy. And then, a cry. Tiny, fragile, but unmistakably alive. She held the baby first. Of course. Skin against skin, wrapped in linen. Eyes still closed. Then she passed the child to him. His hands shook, not from fear, but from wonder. Imagine you've worked fields, chopped wood, herded animals, but never have you held something so light, so breakable, so yours. He cried. Just a little. She smiled, exhausted, but smiling. The midwife left. No one stayed long. People had their own lives to return to. But that night, the cottage felt full, not just with a baby, but with meaning. And so began a new rhythm. Days became shorter, nights longer. Sleep came in pieces, but somehow, they managed. She nursed by firelight. He fetched water before dawn. She hummed old songs. He learned to rock the cradle with his foot while cutting carrots. The quiet grace of partnership. The baby grew, day by day, from swaddled bundle to a wiggling, blinking little creature that sneezed like a kitten. Soon, there were first words, not always clear, not always polite, but magical. The first time the child said mama, her hands stopped in the dough. The first time he heard papa, he nearly dropped the bucket. And then came walking, wobbly, uncertain, bumping into chairs, goats, everything. But each step was a miracle, because every parent in every age knows what it means to watch a soul unfold. Let's sit in their home for a moment. Late afternoon, sunbeams sneaking in through the shutters, the baby asleep in a bundle on the floor. She's mending socks. He's carving a small wooden animal, just something for the child to chew on. No one speaks, because everything that needs saying is already understood. These were the moments that didn't make it into history books, but they were the ones that kept people alive. Of course, not everything was gentle. Raising children then was a quiet gamble with nature. Fevers came without warning. Food shortages made meals uncertain. Every cough was a prayer. Every smile a small victory. But even in hard times, parents hoped, and that hope was its own kind of nourishment. Children played outside with sticks, made castles from mud, chased chickens, laughed without knowing why, and when they fell, someone was always there, to brush off the dirt, to kiss the scraped knee. Let's talk about birthdays. Not the kind with balloons or cakes, but simple ones, marked by maybe a piece of honeyed bread, or a song sung just a little louder. Sometimes he'd whittle a toy, sometimes she'd sew a new cap, and the child, he or she didn't ask for much. A day with warm soup, and held hands was enough. And when the child cried at night, one would rise, always, even with aching backs, even with barely any rest, because that's what love does, even in wooden shoes, even in cottages with dirt floors. Now, let's imagine when the child got older, started asking questions. Why is the sky blue? Why do birds sing? Why does Papa's beard itch? And they would answer, not always correctly, but always kindly, because medieval parents knew that wonder was more important than accuracy. On Sundays they'd walk to church, all dressed in their best, the child holding both their hands, swinging between them, laughing at stones, stopping to pick flowers. Sometimes they'd stop by the market, buy maybe share a warm turnip pie if coins allowed. And on the walk home, tired feet, but happy hearts. That sounds like poetry, doesn't it? But it was real, more real than most things. She'd teach the child how to thread a needle. He'd teach how to tie knots. They'd both teach kindness, patience, respect for bees, for bread, for old people. And when the first tooth came loose, it was wrapped in cloth, saved, not for money, but for memory. When the child first drew something, just a circle and 2 dots, it was hung near the hearth like it belonged in a palace. These were the moments that mattered. Let's peek into a bedtime scene. Night again. The child is sleepy, too much running today, too much sun, too much soup. One parent tells a story, the other strokes hair, a candle flickers, the child's eyes droop, a final whisper, I love you, and then, silence. Except for breathing, always life, humming beneath everything. Now, let's not pretend it was always perfect. Some parents were harsh, some lost their tempers, some carried their own childhood hurts into parenthood, but many tried. They tried, so hard, with the little they had, because even then, love wasn't about riches. It was about effort. A sock darned 20 times. A soup stirred with the last carrot. A lullaby sung with a hoarse throat. Do you feel it? That warmth, that steady beat? That was the sound of a medieval family. Not loud, not grand, but deeply wonderfully human. And one day, that child would grow, fall in love, just like their parents had, and start the cycle again. More soup, more stories, more sleepy smiles by firelight. History forgets these things, but we don't have to. Not tonight. Tonight, we remember the real part of love, the part where your child's hand wraps around your finger, the part where you forget how tired you are because they finally laughed, the part where you sing, even if no one else can hear. The wax has melted fully now. The cradle creaks just a little. The fire is dying down, but the warmth remains, because even in the middle of a hard world, love found a way, in a cottage, in a lullaby, in the silence between 2 people who kept trying, every day. Time is strange, isn't it? You close your eyes, and when you open them again, the child has grown taller than you. The fields don't feel as easy beneath your knees, and the small mirror of polished bronze shows a different face. Let's go back to the little cottage, but now, the air is quieter. The baby's cradle, it's been put away. The once cluttered corners, tidied now, but something new fills the space, a calmness. The couple we've followed, they've grown older, not old, not yet, but older. A few more lines on her face, a few more groans when he stretches in the morning. Still, they wake up before the sun. Old habits don't fade easily. She reaches first for her shawl, He swings his feet onto the cold floor, just like always, and they meet by the fire, the same fire they've lit for years. She smiles first, he nods, no words needed, because love, after time, becomes a language of glances and gestures. Do you want to know something funny? She still mends his socks, even though she complains about it every time. He still brings her wildflowers on occasion, even though she says they make her sneeze, and both of them still remember the way they met, even though the details keep changing with every telling. Time does that. It softens some memories, sharpens others, but the feeling underneath stays. Now, he's working less in the fields, not because he wants to, but because his back, it tells him so. She's teaching the neighbor's daughter how to bake, passing on tricks, how to know the dough is ready just by touching it. They've found a rhythm, the loud, chaotic middle years are fading, and what remains is gentle. They walk slower now, often hand in hand, not for romance, but for balance. On market days, they still go, even if they don't need much, just to be among people, to see the young ones bustle around, loud and full of hope. He watches them, sometimes, shakes his head, smiles. You'll understand one day, he whispers. She watches too, remembers when her waist was small, and her hair still caught the sun, but she doesn't miss it, not really, because with age comes something else, peace. Let's step into an evening, the kind where the sky turns purple, and the birds sound different. They're sitting outside their cottage, not saying much, just listening. The wind rustles the herbs hanging by the window. A goat bleats. Someone's cooking with onions a few houses away. And between them, silence, but the good kind, the kind that only grows between people who've truly lived together. He tells her about something funny that happened in the village. She laughs, but not too loud. Her laughter has changed too. It used to be quick, now it comes from deeper inside. She teases him about his beard. He pretends to be offended, then grins. And then, they fall quiet again, watching the sky change colors, just like they've done for years. Let's talk about their home now. It's aged too. The floor creaks louder, the roof leaks in one corner when it rains. But it's theirs, still warm, still full of little signs of their life. A cracked bowl that no one dares throw away, a faded curtain stitched with the child's first embroidery, a bench with 2 names carved into it. Faint, but still there. History often forgets these homes, but they were the heart of everything. In winter, they stay closer to the fire. He plays with a bit of wood in his hands, not really carving, just passing time. She knits slowly, eyes half closed. The cat, yes, they have one now, curls between them. And the stories come out again, the ones they've told 100 times. But somehow they still matter, because memory becomes more precious when the years grow short. Let's imagine one of their evenings. The child, now grown, visits, brings their own child, and suddenly, the house is full again. Laughter bounces off the walls. Someone spills something. Bread is passed around, and the old couple, they sit, watching, smiling. She reaches for his hand under the table, just gently, just enough, and he squeezes it, says nothing, because everything is already being said. Let's speak, just for a moment, about regret. Yes, even they had some. Things said in anger, dreams that faded, opportunities missed, but those thoughts, they come quietly now, not like storms, more like distant bells, faint, manageable. Because more than anything, they are proud. Proud of surviving, of loving, of raising a child, of holding on, even when things broke. And that kind of pride, that sits in the chest like warm tea, it soothes, it heals. Let's move ahead, just a little. The seasons keep turning, leaves fall again, and he walks slower than ever, sometimes stops mid-step, just to breathe. She notices, pretends not to, but always offers an arm. They still laugh, but quieter. They still argue, but softer. They still dream, but smaller. A good meal, a quiet morning, a visit from a neighbor. And one day, they sit by the fire, and the silence stretches a little longer. He's dozed off. She strokes his hair. He murmurs something. She doesn't catch it, but it doesn't matter, because she knows what he meant. That's what aging together means. Not knowing everything, but understanding everything that matters. Let's stay with them here, in this tiny wooden house. No gold, no scrolls, no history books to mention them. Just two people who chose each other, and kept choosing, even when the days were gray, even when the path was uphill. Time will take them, as it takes us all, but not tonight. Tonight, they're still here, still warm, still together. And so are we, listening, breathing, remembering what matters. So, lay down your worries. Let the quiet settle in, and know that love, real love, doesn't need castles or crowns. Just two hearts, a little firelight, and enough time. The sky feels a little different now, like it's holding something softer. He doesn't wake up as early anymore, and when he does, there's only one cup on the table, one chair pulled out, one blanket folded neatly by the fire. She's not there anymore, and you might think that would feel like the end, but in this quiet world, where time moves in slow circles, it's not an ending, just another shape of love. He still talks to her, sometimes out loud, most times just in his thoughts. He tells her what the neighbor's boy said, how the goat knocked over the bucket again. He laughs at his own stories now, but softly. You see, in medieval times people didn't treat grief the same way we do now. They didn't hide it, didn't rush it. They let it live among them, like an extra shadow, like a second heartbeat. There's no grand ceremony, no marble stones, just a spot by the tree, with a circle of small rocks, and a sprig of rosemary. That's where she rests. He visits every morning, sits on the stone he placed there himself, talks a little, listens more, and sometimes, he just sits in silence, because grief doesn't always speak. Sometimes it just breathes. Inside the cottage, not much has changed. Her shawl is still hanging by the door, her basket still full of dried lavender. He hasn't moved her needle and thread from the table, not because he's holding on, but because it still feels like hers. You won't believe this, but even the cat looks for her sometimes, sniffs the corners, pauses by her chair, then curls up there anyway, as if warmth can linger, even after someone's gone. He doesn't cry much. He did, once, right after, but now, the tears are different. They come when he hears a song she liked, or smells baked apples. And sometimes, they don't come at all, just a tightness in the chest, a kind of missing that has no name. Do you know what the villagers do? They don't avoid him. They don't say strange things like move on. They bring bread. They sit with him. They let the silence fill the room. Because in their world, everyone knows loss. And everyone knows, it doesn't need fixing, just space. Let's walk with him. One afternoon, he's moving slower, yes, but still strong, still upright. He passes the children playing by the well. One of them waves. He waves back. Not all days are heavy, some are light, and the sun still feels good on his face. At the market, a woman smiles at him. A widow too. Their eyes meet. Not in romance, but in understanding. That silent club of those who've loved deeply, and let go. There's no loneliness, like losing someone who remembers your first smile, your first fall, your first everything. But there's also no memory as golden. He still dreams of her. Not always, but when he does, she's always young in the dreams. Always wearing that red ribbon she liked, and always smiling, like she knew something he didn't. He wakes up slowly from those dreams, not sad, just full. As if love can visit, just for a while. Even from beyond the veil of time. Let's step into his home again. The fireplace glows gently. He's sitting with a book, not reading really, just touching the pages. A letter from her sits folded beside him, one she wrote years ago. Nothing dramatic, just a note about picking mushrooms, and reminding him not to forget supper. But to him, it's a treasure, proof that she was here, that they were real. He sometimes speaks her name before sleep, whispers it into the dark, not hoping for a reply, just as a ritual, a soft comfort. People ask him sometimes, "Will you marry again?" He smiles, shakes his head, not out of bitterness, but peace. He's known enough love to last. In their world, widowhood wasn't always tragic. It was expected, honored, even respected. The villagers would nod at him kindly. The children would listen closer to his stories, because those who've lost often carry the clearest memories. One chilly morning, he finds a letter tucked under his door. It's from his daughter. She's grown now, living in another town. She writes about her garden, her son's first word. She signs it, "Tell Mum I miss her." He reads that part twice, and once more for good measure. He writes back, tells her about the owl that won't stop hooting outside his window, and that the cat is getting fat. And quietly, he adds a line, "I still see your mother, in the corners of things. Let's go back to that stone by the tree." One day, he brings a blanket, sits longer than usual. He doesn't speak, just listens, to the wind, the birds, the sound of the stream nearby. And in that moment, he doesn't feel alone. He feels held, because love doesn't end with a heartbeat. It continues, in gestures, in memory, in the way someone else now needs bread the way she did. He teaches the neighbor's child how to fix a hinge, shows the same tricks he once showed her, and when the child says thank you, he nods, but inside, he's whispering it to her. There's something beautiful about aging alone, not lonely, just alone, because solitude, when chosen, can feel like a soft wool coat, familiar, protective, warm. He still has days of laughter, still eats honey when no one's looking, still snores, still forgets to water the herb pot, and still talks to her, now and then. Because grief doesn't leave, it simply changes costumes. And then one evening, the fire burns low, the wind taps gently at the window, and he feels tired, not ill, not frightened, just tired. He lies down, pulls the blanket to his chin, closes his eyes, and smiles, because he knows she's waiting. And somewhere in a place beyond time, a red ribbon flutters in the wind, and two souls meet again. No rush, no fanfare, just together. Love, real love, isn't loud, isn't perfect, but it is eternal, and that's the soft truth that held many through long winters and lonely nights in the medieval world. So, if your heart feels heavy tonight, let it rest here, let it be held in this quiet story, because even the hardest goodbyes can hold the gentlest returns. There's something different in the way he walks. He doesn't stumble like the village boys do. No mud on his boots. No laughter spilling too loud from his mouth. He's quiet, deliberate. He carries a rose, but not just to give it away. No, he's memorizing the perfect moment. We've left the thatched cottages for now. Now we're wandering into stone halls, candle-lit corridors, tapestries on walls. We're inside a castle, where love doesn't run wild in fields. It whispers beneath velvet. It hides behind fans and glances. The noble class had their own rules. So many rules. Dating, or what they called courtship, wasn't a private matter. It was almost choreographed, as if love was a slow, careful dance, and one wrong step could mean a scandal. Let's look closer. At a young woman maybe 16. Her dress is stitched with gold thread. She's been taught to never raise her voice, to never step forward first, to always let the man approach, even if her heart leaps before he does. She's in the garden now. Not by accident. She's been told he may walk by at this hour, and so she waits. Not staring, just tending a rosebush, slowly. There he is, coming down the path. His cloak is deep blue, a color reserved for the well-born. He notices her, but he doesn't smile. That wouldn't be proper. Instead, he stops, picks a bloom, and lays it gently on the stone wall near her. No words, just the flower. That was everything. That was the conversation. Now, let's step into the next morning. She finds a small slip of parchment, tucked into her embroidery frame. It reads, "Your grace is the moon that dims all stars." Cheesy, maybe, but it's all they had, because noble courtship was filled with poetry, riddles, and veiled compliments. No direct feelings, no hands held in public, no kissing, not even alone. That came much, much later, if ever. But love? Oh, it bloomed anyway, quietly, like ivy climbing a cold stone wall. Slow, persistent, beautiful. Sometimes they would meet in the chapel, by chance, or so it seemed. They'd kneel at the same time, say prayers aloud, each listening more to the other's voice than to the words. One blink, one breath too long between lines, was a message. You won't believe this, but even gloves became messengers. She might drop hers, he'd pick it up, hold it just a little too long, and return it, warm from his hand. That warmth meant everything. At feasts, she'd pass him an apple, he'd eat it without looking at her, because if anyone noticed, it would become gossip, and in noble life, gossip was a guillotine. So much of their love existed in the spaces between what they were allowed to do. The notes, the symbols, the gifts. A handkerchief with her scent, a carved token from his family's crest. There's a strange kind of romance in that, isn't there? Not being able to touch, so every word, every glance, becomes holy. But don't be fooled, these weren't always love matches. Many noble courtships were arranged. Families talked before the hearts did, and sometimes they never even met before the betrothal. Imagine meeting someone for the first time, and knowing you'll share a bed, a title, a child, but maybe not love. And still, some found it, even through all that, even in marriages forged for land, power, alliances. Somehow hearts found each other in the quiet hours after dusk. Let's peek behind the curtain of one such tale. Lady Eveline and Sir Cedric, their marriage was arranged before she even turned 14. They didn't speak before the ceremony, only nodded politely. He gave her a small mirror trimmed in ivory. She didn't know what to do with it, but later that night, when the castle had gone still, she looked into it, and found, tucked behind the glass, a miniature painting, of a hawk. That was his crest, but also, a message. A hawk soars freely, but always returns home. She never told anyone, but from that moment, she watched him differently, and he stopped leaving as often for the hunt. Their courtship began after the wedding, soft jokes whispered between bites at supper, quiet stories beside the hearth. They didn't fall in love, they grew in it, like vines on a wall, and in the end, their children remembered laughter, not duty, not titles, just warmth. But of course, not every story ended sweetly. Some nobles married, and stayed strangers, rooms shared, beds divided, hearts cold. But even in those tales, there were moments, a shared joke, a single night of honesty, a memory that outlived bitterness. Do you know about the maypole? Once a year even nobles could dance. Boys and girls, even the ones with titles, would grab colored ribbons and dance around the pole in the village. It was one of the few moments when rules bent, when hands could touch, when laughter didn't need permission, and many courtships began there, under blossoms, under music, under stars. Sometimes courtship lasted months, sometimes years, and sometimes it was stolen in a single week. There's a letter in an old archive, written in 2072, from a knight to a noblewoman. It reads, "I've seen many battles, but none undo me like your eyes. Say the word, and I'll lay down my sword forever." He never received a reply. She married another, but the letter, she kept it, till her death. Love isn't always loud, or fair, or simple. Sometimes, it's just a soft ache that lives between pages, between glances, between what could have been. And in the castles of old, that was enough. That was everything. So tonight, as you drift, think of that quiet garden, of the rose left on stone, and the glance, held a second too long, because in those spaces, love lived, still lives, always will. Do you hear that? The scratching of a quill, tiny echoes on old parchment. It's the sound of love being written, instead of spoken. We've wandered far from stone castles now, and we're in a cold stone chamber. Quiet, simple, just a wooden writing desk, and a man sitting beside a candle that's nearly melted down. He dips his pen, and begins, "My dearest Lynette, though these fields are distant, and your voice silent in the wind, I feel you near." Ah, that's how it often went, because many lovers in the medieval world didn't always get to stay in the same place, especially those drawn into war, pilgrimage, or trade. Did you know some young couples were separated for years? Yes, because if your lover was a knight, or a merchant, or even a scribe to a traveling lord, you might only see them once a year, sometimes never again. But what kept them together was letters. Handwritten, sealed with wax, scented with crushed petals, or dusted with lavender, carried by couriers across muddy roads, over hills, through villages where no one even knew your name. One of the most famous collections of these come from the court of Eleanor of Aquitaine. Dozens of love letters, flowery, yes, but also deeply human. One wrote, "I count each sunrise not by its light, but by its distance from the day I last saw your hands." Isn't that something? They didn't need cameras, or phones, just ink, and waiting. But what did they say? Well, some letters were poetic, like little lullabies pressed into paper. Others were awkward, clumsy, filled with things like, "My boots are wet and my soup is cold, but I saw a robin and it reminded me of your laugh." Real love, messy love, even in ink. Now, let's follow someone else. Her name is Aveline. She's not noble, she's not rich, she's the daughter of a village baker, and one summer, a monk passes through, young, with a quiet smile and a voice like warm milk. They speak only twice, once when she offers him bread, and once when he returns her smile. But he leaves behind a folded piece of parchment. It reads, "I shall pray for your hands, for they bring warmth to the hungry." That was enough. For years she kept that letter under her pillow, even when she married another, even when she was old. Ah, and yes, married couples wrote too, especially when separated by war or sickness. Some letters were funny, like this one found in 1391. "I trust you haven't burned the stew, and that the goat still behaves worse than your brother." See, they had jokes too, even in the dark times, even when fear and distance sat beside them at supper. But letters were more than just love notes. They were permission. Courtship by mail was sometimes the only way people could even begin a relationship, especially if families disapproved. So they'd write in secret, hide letters inside hollowed-out books, or sew them into cloaks. And when they read them, people didn't just skim, they devoured them, slowly, over and over. Some even memorized entire letters, just to whisper at night. Let's drift now to the roads, to a time when young lovers traveled for love. Yes, they did. There are records of men walking weeks just to propose in person, or to deliver a gift themselves. One carried a carved wooden comb, all the way from Normandy to York, just to say, "I remember your hair." Others, well, they traveled under religious excuses, like pilgrimages, but really, they wanted to see someone, just for a moment, a glance, a touch. Pilgrim romances were complicated, sometimes deeply spiritual, sometimes heartbreakingly short. A monk might meet a young widow at an inn. They'd share stories of loss, sit beside a fire, say goodnight, and then go on with their journey. That was it. But that moment, it became a memory both carried like a stone in their pocket. There's a record of a pilgrim named Tomas who fell in love with a girl named Bruni on the way to Santiago. They shared bread beneath an olive tree. He gave her a feather from a bird he'd found. She gave him a blue ribbon from her dress. And that was all. They walked separate paths the next day, but 50 years later, the ribbon was still found tied in the pouch he was buried with. Sometimes, love didn't need years, just an hour, just a story, just something to carry. But yes, some couples did wait years to be together. And the moment they reunited, it wasn't always like in the songs. Sometimes they barely recognized each other. Sometimes the person they remembered was now a stranger. But still, they tried. They sat. They shared bread. They spoke softly. And sometimes, the spark returned. There's one tale from 2084. A woman named Yiseld received word that her betrothed, a knight, had died in battle. So she married another. Raised 3 children. 20 years later, the knight came home. He had survived, lost his memory from a head wound, woke up in a monastery with no name, only slowly remembered, and came back. They met in the churchyard. No one spoke. He simply knelt before her, kissed the hem of her dress, and left. She visited his grave every year after he passed, even though she was married to another till her own death. That's what love was sometimes, a shadow that walked beside you, quiet, loyal, even when not returned. So tonight, as you rest, think of that letter, tucked under the pillow, of a feather passed beneath an olive tree, of the sound of a quill, moving across parchment, with the weight of love behind it. Because sometimes, the truest hearts don't speak, they write, and wait, and whisper in ink, silk ribbon, a carved spoon, a single pressed flower hidden in a pocket. These weren't just objects. In the medieval world, they were everything. Love in that time didn't come with diamonds, it came with meaning. And so, when someone liked you, truly liked you, they didn't shout it in the town square, they gave you something quiet, something personal. Let's wander into a village market, not a grand city, no, just a cobbled path, a few wooden carts, herbs hanging from ropes above heads. There, we see a young boy, he's nervous, fingering a coin in his pocket, not much, maybe enough for a single dried rosebud from the herbalist. He buys it, wraps it in parchment, then slips it onto a bench outside the baker's door, where Elaine always sits. He doesn't wait for her to find it, he just walks away. And inside, Elaine finds it, and smiles. See, that was a medieval gift, a gesture, small, but full of feeling. Sometimes people gifted ribbons to tie in hair, a favorite, especially during village dances. A boy might reach over during the last dance of the night, and offer a ribbon of blue silk. If the girl accepted it, it meant she would save a dance for him the next week. And if she tied it into her braid, then it meant more. Maybe she liked him too. And embroidered tokens, now those were precious. A young girl might spend hours, no weeks, stitching a small square of linen, decorated with little red hearts, clumsy birds, curling vines, and when she gave it, that was serious. Some boys would carry those tokens inside their armor, close to their hearts, even into battle. One story from Brittany tells of a knight, who was found on the battlefield, with nothing left on him. No name, no family crest, just a folded cloth embroidered with the word beloved. He was buried with it, and a flower. Not all gifts were pretty though. No, some were practical. A wooden comb carved by hand, a soapstone pendant, with initials scratched into the back, a spoon. Yes, a spoon. People made spoons for lovers. A young man in Wales carved a spoon from a yew tree, and gave it to the miller's daughter. On the handle, 2 birds, wings touching. That was all. She kept it her entire life, and when she died, the spoon was buried in her apron. Gifts could also be shared food, not a feast, but a plum saved from market, or a bit of honeycomb wrapped in cloth, or even, a sip of cider, when no one was looking. Sometimes, lovers had no money at all, so their gifts were moments. A story told by firelight, a lullaby hummed near the river, a carved name under the bridge, hidden private. Oh, and let's not forget the wildflowers. So many wildflowers, picked from meadows, tucked into window sills, braided into hair, pressed into books. Every flower had meaning. Lavender for loyalty, chamomile for patience, poppies for dreams. One girl even created a flower code with her sweetheart. Each day he left a flower on her doorstep. She had to decode the message. It was their secret, their own language. And once for her birth, he gave her a small wooden box. Inside were petals from every flower he'd ever given, dried, fragile, scented like memories. He said, "This is every word I couldn't say." Sigh. Then there were rings. Simple bands, twisted from copper or pewter. If a boy gave a girl a ring, even a crude one, it meant, "I choose you." Even if he could never afford a real wedding. Even if his hands were too rough to hold hers long. One girl, Iselda, was given such a ring by a boy who had to leave for war. He said, "It's not gold, but it's mine. She wore it on a cord around her neck. Every day. Even after marrying someone else. Even when her hair turned gray. And what about the musical gifts? Songs. People wrote songs for love. Or even borrowed verses. They'd recite poetry near the fields. Under a tree, sometimes they'd whisper lyrics from traveling troubadours. As if they were their own. And the best ones, made up on the spot, silly, sweet, often terrible, but that made them better. Like one boy who sang to his crush, "Your eyes are like two stones, shiny ones, and your hair smells like sheep, but soft sheep," and she laughed, and kissed his cheek anyway. The beauty of effort, of awkward, unpolished truth. And we can't forget the mirror tokens. Very rare, but if someone gave you a tiny polished mirror, it meant, "I see myself in you." Poetic, isn't it? Only nobles had such gifts. But the meaning, universal. Let's take a breath here, and close our eyes for a second. Imagine you live in a village. Just simple dirt roads, no letters, no phones, no silver rings, just a boy who gives you a piece of string, tied in a knot, and he says, "Every time you touch this, think of me." That's it, that's the gift, and somehow, it's more valuable than gold, because it's true, and you know it. We often think of history as loud, battles, kings, iron, but sometimes, history was soft, like two fingers brushing together while passing a basket, like a rose left on a doorstep, like a note scratched onto the back of a spoon. So tonight, while you rest, think of the little things, the tiny tokens, because sometimes the smallest gifts carry the heaviest love. A ribbon, a song, a spoon, a flower, a name whispered once and never forgotten. Imagine this first. You're standing on a dirt road, a long one, cold wind blowing past your face, and somewhere, miles and miles away, there's someone you love, but you can't go to them, not yet, maybe not ever. So, what do? You find a scribe. Tamed. For a single coin, maybe a loaf of bread in exchange. You ask him, "Can you write her a letter?" Now most peasants. Let's be honest. They didn't write, but in every town there was someone, a traveling friar, a monastery monk, or just a clever baker's son, who'd been taught letters, who would quietly write what your heart felt. So a young man sits down by candlelight, the scribe dips his pen, scratches across parchment, "Dear Annette," and the boy begins. "Tell her I still remember the red of her scarf. Tell her that every day since she left, I've walked past the tree where we carved our names. Tell her I dream of her laugh." And the scribe writes every word, every awkward beautiful thing. Then folds it carefully, marks it with a little cross, or a pressed flower, or a smudge of flour to prove yes, this is from him. And hands it off to a merchant, a traveler, a baker heading toward Annette's village, and somehow across rivers and hills, that letter reaches her. She opens it, reads it aloud to her sister maybe, and cries. Because sometimes, that letter was everything. And some girls, they reply, yes, they asked a priest to write back, or used secret codes, even pictures. Some would draw a sun to mean you light up my days, or a bird in flight, I'm thinking of you. Or two trees growing close, that one's obvious, isn't it? And for those who couldn't send anything at all, they memorized words, little poems, whispers shared at harvest time. If I had ink, I'd stain the sky with your name. Some letters were hidden, tied into clothes, sewn beneath hems, baked into pies. Yes, that happened. There's even a story from Cornwall about a girl who stitched her message into a man's shirt. Every hem had a word, and when he wore it, he was wrapped in her love. Now, in noble circles, love letters were a craft, elaborate, covered in flourishes and painted edges, written in Latin or French, delivered by messengers on horseback. One noblewoman sent a scroll perfumed with rose oil, another included a lock of hair in the fold, and if the letter came back, with the hair tied in a bow, it meant the love was returned. But sometimes, the letter didn't come back. Or worse, it returned unopened. And the heart broke quietly. No words. Just silence. You see, Even when they wrote, love in medieval times was still risk. Even a letter carried danger. There were priests who burned letters, fathers who tore them in half, and once, a king had a man jailed for writing poetry to his daughter. Still, they wrote, again and again, with ink, with berries, with ash, whatever they had. Because love doesn't wait for permission, does it? Ah, one of the sweetest stories ever recorded was of a woman named Magdalena. She wrote one letter every year to the man she loved, though he never answered. He'd moved across the sea, never returned, but every year, she left a note for him tied in the branches of a hawthorn tree. Each one said only, I still remember. She did that for 27 years. No one knows if he ever read one, but she wrote them anyway. Even monks, who had sworn off love, sometimes broke their silence to write secret messages. Some were discovered in books, centuries later. A single phrase, her name is still the softest word I know. Others were just initials, scratched into stone. A heart on a windowsill. A poem scribbled in the margins of a prayer book. Not every letter was romantic. Some were apologies, some were dreams, some were just hope. And sometimes there wasn't even writing, just symbols. A blue feather, a tiny coin split in two, half kept by the boy, half given to the girl. If they met again, years later, they could match the coin and know. Even now, in the ruins of old monasteries, they find scraps, bits of parchment. One says, your hands are fire. Another just, wait for me. The paper crumbles, but the feeling, still there. Let's take a deep breath. And imagine, just for a moment, you receive a letter, not typed, not from your phone, but inked by hand, on soft parchment. And it says, when I close my eyes, you are the only light. Doesn't that warm something in you? Now imagine, you waited 3 months for that letter. Not minutes, not days, 3 months. But still, it arrives. Still, it matters. In the silence of night, under a candle's breath, you unfold the paper and feel seen. Ah, that was love in the medieval world. Messy, delayed, quiet, but real. So very, very real. Even when no one else knew. Even when no one could help, even when the ink ran, they wrote, because their hearts wouldn't stay silent. And so, Theme, if tonight you're still listening, let this be your parchment. Let every soft pause, every hush, every sigh, be a kind of letter, written just for you. Fold it gently, and hold it close, because love, in all its ancient, strange and slow ways, still knows your name. By now, it feels like we've sat beside flickering candles, walked down dusty lanes, shared bread under wooden roofs, and seen love through the cracks in a much, much older world. But tonight, we go to the quietest, softest part of all, the part that didn't happen in public, not in marketplaces, or under church towers. No, this time, we step into the world of marriage, after the wedding. Yep, what it meant to live with love, or something like it. Let's take a deep breath and begin. Imagine two people. Maybe they've known each other for years. Maybe they just met on their wedding day. The feast is over. The guests have gone. The sun has sunk behind the hills. Now comes something different. The first night, the shared home, the rest of life. In medieval times, love wasn't the main reason to marry. Often, it was about land, name, survival, but still, people found tenderness, sometimes, somewhere. And here's the thing. Most couples, especially peasants, didn't go off on a honeymoon. There was no villa in the south of France, no private island. They might not even leave the village. Instead, the honeymoon was often a drink. Yes, a fermented honey brew, given to the couple for one full moon after their wedding. That's actually where the word honeymoon comes from. Honey, moon, drink the sweet, survive the sour. Some believed this drink would help bring children. Others thought it kept away evil spirits. But mostly, it was a gift, to soften the start of something that could be very hard. Now, as the door shut behind them, Newlyweds might be full of hope, or fear, or nothing at all. Because love, it came later. If it came. Some couples, over time, became partners in the truest sense. They shared work, routines, secrets. They laughed at the same dog who begged for bread. They waited together through cold winters, counting how much grain was left. They didn't say "I love you." That phrase wasn't even common. But they said things like, "You came back early. I saved the last egg for you. I waited until you got home to eat." And that was something. Others? Well, sometimes it didn't work. Not every story is soft. Not every marriage was kind. But many settled, found rhythm, learned how to carry the days together, without crushing each other. And in noble households, things were very different. A lady might live in her wing of the manor, the lord in his warfare. They might dine separately, sleep in different rooms, but letters would be passed between them, even under the same roof. A folded page on the servant's tray, a note hidden in a book of psalms. Your laughter at the table was missed. The roses you planted bloom already. I wore the silk you gave. Simple things, deliberate things. And if love grew, well then, they were lucky. But love didn't always mean intimacy. In fact, there was much that was never spoken of. Topics we speak freely about today were veiled behind traditions. In some regions, a couple's first night was witnessed, or blessed, by others. Some thought it was sacred, others, embarrassing. But afterward, married life meant more than just two people in a bed. It was about joining economies. How much bread would be baked? Who fed the chickens? Who mended the clothes? Who walked to town? In most homes, men and women shared work in ways we often forget. A woman might run a side trade in herbal medicine. A man might spin thread on winter nights. They weren't just husband and wife. They were a team. A quiet, slow, steady kind of team. Some stories tell of husbands who left love notes in toolboxes, or women who baked a special spice bread, only on their anniversary, no matter how poor the year had been. And for those who lost partners, widows, widowers, the grief was heavy, especially if love had grown. They wore mourning clothes, tied black threads in their sleeves, even carved names into trees, just to remember. Because even if it started without love, it didn't always end that way. You won't believe this, but in many villages, people had secret marriage marks. Yes, little hand-carved symbols on wood beams above their shared bed. A crescent moon, 2 crossed arrows, a simple X with a petal in the middle. These were private, never spoken aloud, but every time they looked up, they knew, this is our space. Even the way they slept together had meaning. There was often one large bed, filled with blankets and furs, and in colder homes the children might sleep at their feet. So, private moments, rare, precious. Some lovers spoke in code. They tapped fingers 3 times on the table to say "I see you," or folded a napkin twice to say thank you for waiting. Love in medieval marriage wasn't loud. It was in glances, in shared routines, in standing silently together under rain, neither of them moving away. And, yes, there were also those who married only once, loved only once, and lived quietly, with that memory for decades. Like the old shepherd's wife, who kept her husband's boots by the door, years after he passed, or the blacksmith who forged a heart into the base of every horseshoe, after his beloved died. No one knew, but he did it every time. Still, love endured, not through flowers, or poetry, but through presence. The kind of love that gets up at 5 a.m. to fetch water, that waits by the fire when you're late from the fields, that patches your only shirt, without being asked. So, as the years passed, some couples never said "I love you," but the way they looked at each other when one coughed, or the way they sat together in silence by the window, said everything. That's the thing, Finn. When we ask what dating was like, we forget to ask what did it become. It became quiet, and not perfect, never perfect, but sometimes, it became home. And that's a kind of love worth remembering. Even 700 years later, Let's take one more deep breath together. Because this part is quiet. It's like closing an old handwritten letter before placing it in a wooden chest, under candlelight. If you've made it this far, then maybe, just maybe, something in the way these people lived and loved has stayed with you. So now, let's slowly, gently let the story come to rest. After years, sometimes decades of being together, whether from marriage, secret companionship, or long-lost love, it all began to fade, just like autumn leaves after the harvest. And with that came a very different part of the medieval dating story, the part where love is remembered, more than it is lived. In the final chapters of their lives, many men and women held on to memories, not rings. There weren't always portraits, or love letters, or wedding pictures. No, but there were other things. A piece of cloth from a wedding gown, a single dried flower from the field where they first met, a shared spoon they never threw away. Sometimes just a quiet corner by the fire, where they sat together, night after night. In the countryside, older couples could be seen still walking slowly down paths they once ran through as children, still sitting beneath trees, where they'd once kissed for the first time. Maybe awkwardly, maybe with laughter. Even the church bells, always ringing, reminded them of that day, the one where they had said yes, maybe not to love, but to each other. And when one partner passed away, the world didn't stop, but their corner of it grew still. You won't believe this, but many widows and widowers would keep one shoe of their partner under the bed. Always the left shoe. They believed it kept the soul nearby. Others would light a candle on the same night each year, quietly, alone. They didn't tell anyone, not even their children. And sometimes, just sometimes, love returned. Two older hearts finding one another, by the riverbank, in the fields, at a feast. Not wild, not fiery, but warm, safe, like wool against cold skin. Even among peasants, who had very little, they carved initials into trees, long after the person was gone. Or they sang an old song, that only the two of them once knew. You'd never notice it, but if you stopped and listened, you could feel it. And among the nobility, where everything was always more complicated, love lived in the margins of books. Sometimes a noblewoman would ask that her favorite psalm book be buried with her, not because of the prayers, but because her lover's note, written on a scrap of lambskin, was hidden between the pages. They might not see each other again, not in this life, but in ink, in thread, in wood, in whispered prayer, they remain. One tale speaks of a woman who lived alone for 30 years after her husband died. She never remarried. Every evening, she would pour 2 cups of ale, place one across the table, and say nothing, just sit and sip. No one knew why she did it, but she knew. Others left behind small tokens in their will. A cloak to the one who once danced with them, a knife to the one who once shared bread. Even death couldn't end the story completely. Some couples were buried side by side, with hands placed gently together, facing east, always east, where the sun rises, where hope begins again. In some graveyards, there are still headstones that hold simple carvings, a pair of birds, a rose with 2 stems, a moon over 2 small cottages. No names, no dates, just love. That's what dating became, Finn. At the end of all things, just being known, and not forgotten. Not for their titles, or their wealth, or their reputation, but for that one night they waited in the rain. That one morning they baked bread with bare hands. That one moment, quiet, unseen, when they chose the other, over and over again. You won't find those stories in royal records. They're not in poems, or painted on walls, but they're there, in the quiet. In every creaking floorboard, in every pressed flower, in every hand-me-down that smells just a little like smoke and lavender. Because even in a world where love wasn't always the goal, somehow, it still found its way through. Through silence, through service, through steady eyes across a dinner table. So if you're still awake, Finn, then maybe you're holding a little piece of that old world now, letting it settle into your thoughts, like soft wool wrapped around tired shoulders. If you are still awake, I think you have to see the video from the 17th minute of the story. Or play this side video, as maybe it can help you sleep better. Goodbye.